Hey everyone, welcome back for episode 2 of my new series, Boxing's Forgotten Legends. If you've forgotten what this is about or you haven't seen this before, it's to highlight legends and icons of the sport which for one reason or another aren't talked about nearly enough or have been outright forgotten by the mainstream sport and boxing media. Now, if you did miss the first episode, that's totally okay. Watch this one first and check out the previous episode, which I'll leave a link to in the description and in the pinned comment. And lastly, I do a variety of different boxing content on my channel, so if you do enjoy this type of video, please subscribe so you stay up to date with all my uploads. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the first legend. The first legend is one of the greatest coaches of all time and also an incredibly underrated fighter at that. His name is Charley Goldman. Goldman is most well known for being the mastermind behind Rocky Marciano, but limiting his career to the Brockton blockbuster would be doing an injustice to the Boxing Hall of Famer. Now the footage you're seeing is obviously of Rocky Marciano, and that's all I'm going to be using for this segment of the video just because there's no video of Charley Goldman actually boxing. Starting his boxing career in 1904, Goldman has stated that he competed in between 300 to 400 fights, but only around 140 being recorded. Boxrec states only 43 fights, 30 wins, 6 losses and 7 draws, but this is due to the exhibition and newspaper decision era of boxing where many fights were not actually recorded or were listed as no decisions. Early in Goldman's career, he would start hanging around his idol at the time, who was Terrible Terry McGovern, who would later become the bantamweight and featherweight world champion and will be making an appearance on this series in a later episode, but I digress. Goldman would even imitate McGovern, parting his hair down the middle just like his hero. Goldman's first ever fight went for almost 3 hours against a man called Eddie Gardner. The fight would be announced as a draw due to the police intervening in the bout. But Gardner wasn't his most famous rival. That man was a man called George Kitson, who he claims to have fought 60 times more or less. On one night, Kitson and Goldman would actually fight twice. Another example of this rivalry comes from BoxingDaily.com, who point out over a 12-day period the two combatants would fight 12 times. Goldman would eventually even fight world champion Johnny Coolin in a no-decision bout. However, Goldman would never become a world champion himself, moving on to coaching after retiring in 1914. His first champion came soon after with Al McCoy when he defeated George Chipp in one of the weirdest title fights in boxing history, but that's for another time. In 1925, Goldman stopped coaching fighters and would only help occasionally. This is until the mid-1930s when he would come back and coach fighters such as Marty Servo, Joey Archibald and boxing legend Lou Ambers. But obviously his most famous protege was Rocky Marciano, but I won't go into the story of Marciano as I have a whole video dedicated to him that I will leave a link to in the description below. However, to highlight Marciano's opinions on Goldman, I will leave you with a quote from Rocky himself. Quote, "He is considered the greatest teacher of boxing in the entire world. I have to say that he had to be because he brought a raw-boned, awkward, clumsy 210-pounder to the title. When you talk about boxing, there really is not a more final word in my book. This man has been a father to me, a trainer, a brother, advisor, everything." End quote. The second legend on this list has to be one of the most influential fighters in history and also a top 15 greatest fighter to ever lace him up. His name is Joe Gans. I will try to find enough watchable footage of Gans for you guys, but if there isn't enough, I will use footage of other fighters that he competed against all around the same era. Gans was the first ever native African American world champion and he did it in style. He was also the first black man to become a title holder since George Dixon in 1892 and Barbados Joe Walcott in 1901, a year earlier. Gans' reputed record stands at 197 fights, 157 wins, 100 coming by way of knockout, 12 losses, 22 draws with 6 no contests. Gans was a very different type of fighter than those of the 1890s and 1900s when he fought. This is because Gans wasn't a brawler, but instead a boxer who would study his opponents, pick out their weaknesses and exploit them. He revolutionized boxing by being quote-unquote scientific, so much so that during this racially charged time, he even generated many white fans too. In the year 1900 at 26 years old, according to the International Boxing Hall of Fame, Gans fought Frank Ernie for the world lightweight title, but Ernie would cut Gans' left eyelid. Fearing that he could go blind if he continued, Gans asked the fight to be called off. Gans would study and analyze Ernie so that in their rematch 2 years later, it would not be competitive. Gans would knock out Ernie in one single round. Some notable opponents of Gans include Terry McGovern, who he reportedly took a dive against, Sam Langford, who he would drop a 15-round decision to, and would also have a draw with the legend that is Barbados Joe Walcott for the welterweight world title. Gans would also knock out the great Mike Twin Sullivan, but Gans' most famous rival was Battling Nelson. Their first meeting is considered one of the greatest fights in history, in which Gans would defeat Nelson by 42nd round disqualification from a low blow from Nelson, although it is important to know that Gans had dropped Nelson a few times in that bout. On the side of this bout, there was erected a memorial to the fight, as that's how legendary this fight had become. They would have 2 more fights, and in both Nelson would defeat Gans by knockout. However, Gans was already suffering from tuberculosis and would die from the illness in 1910 at the age of 35. Joe Gans, also known as the Old Master, was dead, and his death was, according to Brittanica, quote, treated as a national calamity. The last man in this episode is the power-punching lightweight Ike Williams. Williams, according to a ringside reporter, had so much finesse that, quote, he could have played piano with boxing gloves on. In his first 4 years of fighting, Williams had 47 fights with only 4 losses, before eventually losing to former world champion Bob Montgomery with 11 seconds left in the last round. Williams would come back hard, destroying his next 20 opponents, earning a shot at one Zurita's National Boxing Association world title. Williams would win by knockout. Williams, even though he was a world champion, wanted to get that loss back against Bob Montgomery. They would have a rematch, and Ike Williams would win by knockout. Even though he was an incredible fighter, his backroom problems plagued his career. He would have issues with the Managers Guild, Frankie Carbo and Blinky Palermo in particular. Due to Blinky Palermo and Frankie Carbo's roles behind the scenes of his career, Williams would have his money robbed from him. A quote from Ike Williams goes, "Blinky just robbed the hell out of me. 2 fights I received $33,400 fighting Bojack in Philadelphia. I never saw a penny out of that. And $33,500 Jesse Flores, New York. I never saw a penny of that." Ike was one of the most talented, hard-hitting lightweights you'll ever see, explosive and dazzling footwork, although for all those skills, he wasn't paid what he was due. Williams would eventually lose his title by 14th round TKO in 1951 to Jimmy Carter, but over his career he also beat legends such as Kid Gavilan by decision, Bojack by knockout, and Sammy Angat twice by decision. Williams would retire in 1955 with a record of 154 fights, 125 wins, 24 losses, 5 draws and 60 knockouts. A true unadulterated legend. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you did enjoy it and leave a comment what you thought about it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.